So here we have a 2010 Jeep Wrangler. It's the Rubicon edition, unlimited. It's here for an inspection, and on inspection I notice a couple of things. You can see this U-joint is pretty much toast. And you can see the gear oil laying in the housing here coming from the axle seal. So we're going to do axle seals, which are inboard inside here, outer U-joints, and upper and lower ball joints today. So I'll bring you along incrementally as we go. So remove the wheel, the brake caliper, hang the brake caliper up with something suitable. We're going to have to disconnect this wheel speed sensor because there's no way you're going to remove this speed sensor from this cast knuckle. It'll likely break. Because the wheel bearing has to come off. This looks like about a 35 millimeter nut, 34, 35. You need a 13 mil 12 point socket on here. Hopefully this is going to come off. And we'll put some penetrating fluid on these bolts to encourage them to come out. So there's the axle U-joint. You can see it's pretty much toast. And you can see the gear oil down the shaft, so this axle seal is leaking, so we're going to go inside here and replace this axle seal. I see this this came out with the axle. I think that's supposed to support the axle while you're installing it, but it was probably jammed into the seal. I don't know if this has been apart before. The hub was pretty rusty, but it came apart fairly easy. What I did was I installed a bolt in here like so. That's same size but a little longer, and then I put this extension up here against here, and then I had an assistant turn the wheel to the left, of course, with the power steering, and it just popped the joint out. I'll try and video that on the other side. But we're going to go ahead and pull this knuckle off because we've got to change the upper and lower ball joints. And looks like the ball joints are pressed into the ears here, so we're going to leave this tie rod attached, maybe just hang it up. So this is about a 28 millimeter nut here, and this is 7/8 or 22 up here. Don't worry about taking the cotter pin out, just break the pieces of the cotter pin off. And I just gave it one whack here with a 2-pound hammer, and the knuckle is free. So I'm just going to tie this tie rod end up to the stabilizer link here with a tie wrap so that I don't have to disassemble this joint here, because this tie rod's okay. So this ball joint is pressed in from the bottom up, I believe, and this one's from the top down. This one is pretty loose. That's why we're going in here, but if you're going to go to all this work, you might as well change both of them. And you see how I hung the steering knuckle off to the side with this strap here. Should be fine, although I do have to take the front cover off, so it might be in my way, but we'll move it when the time comes. So use a press to press the upper ball joint up from the bottom. I used it without this socket till it moved, and I had to hit it a couple times on the top of the bolt and on here when it was under tension. Now I got it moving. I'm going to use a socket as a spacer. That works pretty handy. There, that's the upper ball joint pressed out. It was full of rust anyways. Now we're going to press the lower ball joint out. This is why I did the upper one first, so I can go like this through here and down from the bottom. I'm going to get the other cup. So put the receiver cup on the bottom this time now, and we can press it right out. There we go. So we'll leave those ball joints out of the way, and we'll take the other side apart now. So I've got the axle nut loose here. I didn't get the wheel speed sensor disconnected yet, but I've got a helper in the cab of the vehicle, and I've got a longer bolt installed in the bottom ear here, threaded in as you can see. Okay, start it up and turn to the right. Yeah. Go ahead and turn to the right. And as you can see, it pushes it out. That's good. Shut it off. Now, mind you, that one came out fairly easy because it's been apart before. I could tell because the bolts were actually not the original bolts in here. But I prefer to do that than wailing on the flange here. And a slide hammer will pull the bearing apart usually. Okay, we have to disconnect that speed sensor connector up at the back of the shock tower there. So I got the axle out. The U-joint is a little stiff right in here. And I got the lower ball joint nut off and the upper one off. So I left the lower one on so this knuckle won't fall down. And like I said, give it a sharp rap with a hammer right here. And it should release. Just like that. That's why you put the nut on the bottom ball joint so it can't fall down. So we're going to tie this up now on this side and press the ball joints out. So I got the ball joint press up against the bottom of the ball joint here, and I've got a lot of pressure on it right now. And I'm going to give it a hit right here with a hammer and see if it'll break free. Sounded like it moved. Let's see now when we get a little bit more pressure. Yeah, it actually is coming out. Now that we got it removed or partially moved, we're going to put the socket in there as a spacer. So there's the front diff cover off. It's been off before. I could see it's been resealed with gray RTV. Now this has the electric lock in it. We're going to remove this bearing cap on the right or on the left side and mark it. Mark this one and this one to the case so they don't mix up the bearing caps. You're supposed to take this pass-through out of here. Chances of it coming out are slim to none. I've never had much luck. I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to remove this bolt and see if this will turn. I'm talking about this electric plug here. If it doesn't, I'm going to turn this down a bit and then I'm going to cut the wires off and rejoin them inside with some sealed butt connectors. So there's a differential carrier out. You can pry it out with a hooked bar. Looking at the bearing races look pretty clean, not pitted. I did end up cutting those two wires. I staggered the length of the wires so I could tell which is which, although I don't think polarity matters. This is what I found inside here. And it was actually inside where the axle seal is. You can see a piece of this seal broken off. So that's the actual axle seal right there and right there. We're going to knock those in from the outside with a piece of pipe. I think these are spacers to keep the axle from dragging in the sand as you're sliding it in, but they had stayed in the case and then somebody jammed them in. So these axle shafts have been out before. Oh well. Don't mix up the bearing races. I hung this one from the left side over here. These are selective thickness, these shims. I'm going to clean up these races and see what they look like. And now we got to knock the seals out and clean everything up. So there's the left axle seal. As you can see, it goes in like this, but there's no rubber left on it. It had been chewed up by that plastic piece that was pushed into the axle seal. And there's the right one. It's actually okay. There's the garter spring that was laying in the housing. Good thing it didn't go into the bearings. So now we got to wash this housing all up and install the new seals, splice some wires and put it back together. So here's the inner axle seals. There's the CR number. I'm going to use this 1.5 inch 3/4 drive socket as a seal driver because it will fit right in nice. And I'm going to drive it through from the other side. I'm going to have a helper tapping on the flange as I guided it in. Piece of pipe and a hammer from the other side. So put a coating of Teflon sealant around the outside of the seal. I've got this one installed already. Now I'm going to do the other side. And I ended up using a seal driver and tapping on the surface until it's flush. So tap that in until it's flush with the case here and put some grease on it. This seal driver worked perfect because it was the exact right diameter for the inside of the case. So it tapped in until it bottomed out. And we're ready to reassemble. But I think that's enough for one day. So there's a differential carrier back installed. Don't forget not to mix up the shims. I marked this cap with a dot and a dot, 2 dots, 2 dots. I spliced the wires, as you can see here, on that connector with shrinkable butt connectors. You're supposed to have a spreading tool to spread the case to make it easier to install this. But I pull the housing out about 1/4 inch, put this side in by itself, and then I tap the spacer in with this homemade tool and managed to get it back in, and then use the bearing caps to gently pull it in. Bearing bolts here, bearing cap bolts are 80 foot-pounds, and we're ready to put the ball joints in and then change the axle U-joints. So next we're going to install the upper and lower ball joints. So there's the 2 part numbers from Moog, and they are different. The upper ball joint has to be mounted with this little slot facing inboard so that when you grease it, the grease goes in. And the lower ball joint has to be installed with the grease fitting pointing towards, I like to point it towards the front of the vehicle. That way you can grease it. So it's going to go in here like this, facing towards the front, so that you can grease it from the front quite easily. And the top ball joint has a grease fitting on the top. Now I've already cleaned the mounting surfaces and cleaned the holes out with a Rolox sanding disc. We're going to press the bottom ball joint in first and then the top ball joint in second. So there's the lower ball joint installed. Now because this ear is tapered, the top surface is not perpendicular to the actual ball joint bore, you have to use a tapered adapter here. There's one in the ball joint kit for this, and then push it in from the bottom. I originally thought I could pull it in from the top, but this works better. So that one's installed. I don't like pulling them in with impact tools. I like to do it by hand. That way you can feel if there's any tension or binding. So there's the setup to push the upper ball joint in. The same problem, this ear is not flat or flush or parallel with the top surface here, so you have to use a tapered adapter. It's in the kit. And I like to push it in by hand until it's flush. Now this ball joint has a locator on it, and it's supposed to be installed inboard. It says right on the ball joint. That's pretty freaking tight. That's it. I said, there's a tapered adapter here, and I marked it with a location paint dot, and I marked the ball joint with a paint dot so that I could see where it goes inboard. So that's it. So there's the knuckle reinstalled on the left side. Ball joint's greased. There's a needle type grease fitting there and a grease fitting up here. And now we're going to change the axle U-joint. As you can see, this U-joint is toast. So we got to knock out these C-locks as best as possible. They're going to be rusted in there, of course. So penetrating fluid and chisels and screwdrivers should work. Once you get the little snap rings out of there, these are the little rings, a hammer and a chisel, and you're going to use the ball joint press now to press this U-joint out. So I use the impact gun to put pressure on it and then tap the end of this and it'll pop free.
Okay.
Nope, it already popped. So once you get one cross broken free like that, you can sometimes put it in the vise. Clamp this down here like this. That didn't work. Oh, well, we'll push it through the other way. Actually, we can still push it some more. Okay, that should work. There we go. So basically repeat that with all 4 crosses, and then we'll clean up everything. So there's the U-joint removed. You can see it's totally wiped out. We have to clean up these ears with a wire brush, and because the snap rings go on the inboard side here, we have to file the surface area here so that there's no rust. Clean these ears up, clean this up as well, and then we'll reinstall the U-joint. I'm using these Moog 377 ones, which have the grease fitting in one of the caps. There's a grease fitting hole. So we'll get these parts all cleaned up and we'll get ready to set the U-joint up. So it turns out that the catalog is not completely correct in the part supplier that I was using. This one shows a 367 for the unlimited Rubicon, but we measured that one and it's wrong. This is what I ordered, 377. It's for Sahara, Sahara Sport, Unlimited Sahara, Unlimited Sport. But I guess the Rubicon has heavier axles or heavier U-joints at least. So on another information site from Part Source, it shows a 489 and a 491. The 489 is non-greasable, super strength, 2.4 inches inside locks, where the 377 is 2.1. So that's the one I need right there, either the 489 or the 491. They only have one in stock in town, so I've got 2 coming from another supplier. They're about the same price, but the problem is I don't have the correct one. So I've taken that joint apart. I'll keep that 377 in stock because it is fairly common, and we'll get the right ones coming. So there's the difference in the two U-joints. The 377 has the same diameter caps, but it's narrower, as you can see here. If you put this one on this one, you can see it's considerably narrower. But the important part is the spacing between the actual snap rings. So this is a 491, and that's apparently what the Rubicon takes. Your bigger joints, stronger, I guess, and the 377 is the stock universal joint for the non-Rubicon models. So we're going to go ahead and put this U-joint in. So I've got one cross already installed. I like to put the one in with the grease fitting on it, with this grease fitting on the actual axle shaft. That way when you turn the wheel, it gives you more room to grease it. Push it through further than it needs to, and then slide the joint across, and then you can make sure that you've started it correctly. And then use the seat clamp or the ball joint press to press it in. Just like so. And do it by hand, don't use an impact gun. We gotta reposition this in the vise. Let's try this again. Alright, now before we get too carried away, we're going to put a snap ring in. One of these rings. You can push it on by hand and then make sure it's centered. And then we're going to push both across at the same time. You can feel it getting tight. Now we're going to give this a small tap right here. That's it. And we should be able to get this other snap ring on now. There we go. Just like that. Okay. Now we turn it 90 degrees and do the other cross. Sometimes helps if you have another person to hold this thing straight. Crosses are pretty snug in these axles. Yep. I'm going to have to put the C-clamp up from the bottom. Because I'm trying to hold it and it's going against the vise. This should work. That's better. And as I said, go through the cross about 1/8 of an inch further than you need to, where the snap ring will go. That way the cross will be protruding on the other side, and you can be sure to get the ball joint or the U-joint cap installed correctly. Could have got a smaller hammer, I think. Put this C-lock in. That one needs to be rotated a bit. Okay. There's probably 100 videos on YouTube on how to change a U-joint, but this is just my way. Some guys use the vise, some guys use a press. I use the ball joint press, as you can see. So when that snap ring is up against, this one is just about in. Put pressure on it. And now we're going to take a chisel, punch, and go through here like this and top that ear. Just to take up the clearance on it, and we can slide this other snap ring in place. That's why it's so important that you clean the rust off of here. I don't think this is completely through yet. Let's see, let's give it one more tap. Oh, I lost that snap ring. Oh, there it is. There we go. You should be able to slide those in with no trouble. That's beautiful. Just like that. Put the grease fitting in. I like to put the grease fitting in the main shaft, like I said, because then when you turn the wheels, you got more room to grease it. Some guys don't like using greasable U-joints. That's it. Now we repeat the process on the other side. So there's the left side back together. I give the backing plate a bit of paint. I changed these 3 bolts back here to new bolts because the existing bolts look like this, focus. There's not much of a head left on them, so I put conventional bolts in there. There's no reason why you can't. 100 foot-pounds for the axle nut, Loctite it. 75 foot-pounds for the bolts in here. 3 bolts that hold the wheel bearing on. Don't forget to route the speed sensor wire up and put some dielectric grease on the connector. And we can put the wheel back together on this side and then reassemble the other side. The rest is pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of filling the front diff with new fluid. And that's it. So we'll call this one a wrap. So here's the good U-joint on the left, or on the right side. You can see that it was ready to fail, or it has failed. It's full of rust. This is not greasable, but even the greasable ones don't last if you don't grease them. So I've cleaned these ears up, filed them. We're going to press the new U-joint in the right hand shaft now.